Dim lighting of the officer's cantina cast long shadows across Zixathara's scarred carapace. As she lifted the fermented nectar to her mandibles, around her, younger soldiers of the hegemony's Fourth Fleet boasted of their upcoming deployment to the Terran front, their chittering voices filled with the kind of confidence that only came from inexperience. She had been like them once, eager, certain of the hegemony's superiority, convinced that these humans would fall like all the others before them. That was before the siege of Kepler-4 to be, before she learned what it truly meant to face humanity. In battle, tell us again about the soft skins, Commander, called out Lieutenant Vexmora, his young voice carrying across the cantina. How many did you kill during the pacification of their outer colonies? Zixathara's for eyes fixed on the lieutenant, noting the way his claws gleamed with fresh sharpening, the pristine condition of his combat chitin. He had never seen real war, never watched his squadmates dissolved by human plasma fire or crushed beneath the treads of their impossibly resilient war machines. The other young soldiers gathered around, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with anticipation. Sit, she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of authority earned through countless campaigns. All of you, if you're so eager to learn about humans, then listen carefully, because your lives may depend on it. The cantina fell silent as the soldiers arranged themselves in a semicircle around her table. Zixathara took another sip of her drink, feeling the familiar burn as it traveled down her throat. She had told this story before, to other young soldiers who thought they knew what war was. Some had listened, others had not. She could usually tell which ones would return from their first engagement with the humans. You want to know about humans, she began, her voice low and measured. Then forget everything you think you know about warfare. Forget everything you've learned about enemy psychology, about the predictable patterns of retreat and surrender that govern civilized conflict. Humans don't follow those rules. She paused, letting her words sink in. In the silence, she could hear the distant hum of the ship's engines, the life support systems that kept them alive in the vacuum of space. Soon, these young soldiers would be breathing the air of alien worlds, fighting and dying for the hegemony's endless expansion. The first thing you must understand, she continued, is that humans are not like us. They're not like the Velter, who surrender when their casualties reach 30%. They're not like the crystalline Jekti, who retreat when their formations are broken. They're not like the gaseous Murden, who negotiate when their supply lines are cut. Humans, she trailed off, her mandibles clicking as she searched for the right words. Humans become more dangerous when they're losing. Lieutenant Vexmora's patches flickered with confusion. Commander, that makes no logical sense. All species fight less effectively when facing defeat. Its basic evolutionary psychology is. Its Zixathara's laugh was bitter, hollow. Tell that to the 3rd Assault Division. Tell that to the brave warriors who thought they were about to claim an easy victory at Kepler-4 for 2B. Tell that to the 40,000 soldiers who never came home. She stood, her massive frame casting a shadow over the assembled soldiers. Her right arm, she noticed, was trembling slightly, a souvenir from the neural disruptor blast that had nearly killed her. During the retreat from that cursed world, the medics had done their best, but some wounds never truly healed. The intelligence briefings told us that Kepler-4 to be was a minor human agricultural world. She continued, beginning to pace. Population, roughly 50 million. Military presence, minimal. Strategic value, low. The humans had been cut off from their supply lines for months. Their orbital defenses had been neutralized. By all tactical calculations, they should have surrendered the moment our troop transports entered the atmosphere. She stopped pacing and turned to face the soldiers. Instead, they fought us in the streets of their cities. They fought us in their forests and their fields. They fought us in their homes and their schools when we destroyed their military bases. They fought us with improvised weapons when we cut off their communications. They fought us with signal fires and runners. When we poisoned their water supplies, they fought us with whatever they could find. But surely, interjected another young soldier, they had to break eventually. Every species has a breaking point. Do they? Zixathara's voice was sharp. I thought so too. We all did. That's why we kept escalating our tactics, kept pushing harder. kept trying to find that magical threshold where human resistance would crumble. We targeted their infrastructure, their food production, their medical facilities. We thought that, by making the cost of resistance too high, they would see reason. She returned to her seat, her movements slower now, weighted with memory. What we didn't understand, what none of us understood, was that humans don't calculate cost and benefit the way we do. They don't weigh their chances of survival against their chances of victory. When a human decides to fight, they fight until they can't fight anymore. And when they can't fight anymore, they find a way to fight anyway. The cantina was absolutely silent now. Even the ambient noise of the ship seemed muted, as if the universe itself was listening to her words. I remember the moment I first truly understood what we were facing, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. It was during the siege of their capital city. We had been fighting for weeks, making steady progress, clearing sector after sector. The humans were running out of ammunition, running out of food, running out of soldiers. By all logical measures, they were defeated. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she was back there, standing in the ruins of a human city, the air thick with smoke and the screams of the dying. That's when we encountered the children. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Several of the young soldiers shifted uncomfortably, their patches dimming. Not human younglings hiding in shelters, waiting to be rescued. Zixathara continued. Human children, some barely old enough to walk, carrying weapons, fighting us, dying for a cause they were too young to understand, but old enough to believe in. She opened her eyes and looked at each soldier in turn. I watched a human child, couldn't have been more than 8 standard years old, charge a full squad of our warriors with nothing but a sharpened stick and a war cry. She knew she was going to die. We all knew she was going to die, but she charged anyway, because in her mind, dying while fighting was better than living under occupation. Lieutenant Vexmora's patches had gone completely dark. That's impossible. No species would allow their young to. Humans aren't no species. Zixathara interrupted. They're humans, and the sooner you understand that, the better. Your chances of surviving your first encounter with them. She took another drink, feeling the weight of the memories pressing down on her. That child's sacrifice bought her people exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds for an adult human to reach better cover. 7 seconds for a sniper to line up a shot. 7 seconds that cost us 3 warriors and a plasma cannon. Was it worth it? By any rational calculation, no. But humans don't think rationally when they're fighting for their survival. But Commander, another soldier ventured, surely their leadership class. They're military commanders. They must think strategically. They must be willing to negotiate, to seek terms when the situation becomes hopeless. Zixathara's laugh was harsh. I thought the same thing. That's why I requested a meeting with their military commander, a human named Colonel Martinez. I was certain that once he understood the futility of continued resistance, he would see reason. I was prepared to offer generous terms. His people would be relocated to a reservation world. Their culture would be preserved. Their lives would be spared. She stood again, her movements sharp with remembered anger. Do you know what he said to me? This Colonel Martinez, this human who had watched his city burn, who had seen his soldiers die, who knew that continued resistance meant the extinction of his people. The soldiers waited, transfixed. He said, we'd rather die free than live as slaves, just like that. Matter of fact, no emotion, no theatrics, just a simple statement of fact, as if he were commenting on the weather. And then he opened fire on our negotiation party. The silence that followed was deafening. Zixathara could see the shock in the young soldiers' faces, the way their certainty was beginning to crack. We lost 12 warriors in that ambush, she continued. 12 of our best, killed during what should have been a peaceful negotiation. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Martinez had used the meeting as cover to evacuate his remaining civilians. Through the city's old tunnel system, he had sacrificed his own life and the lives of his honor guard to buy his people a few more hours of freedom. She returned to her drink, noting absently that her hand was shaking again. That's when I began to understand what we were really fighting. Not just soldiers, not just an enemy army, but an entire species that had collectively decided that death was preferable to defeat. "But you won," Lieutenant Vexmora said quietly. "The reports say that Kepler-440b was successfully pacified. Did we?" Zixathara's voice was bitter. "Yes, we eventually occupied the planet. Yes, we planted our flag in the ruins of their cities. Yes, we could claim victory in our reports to High Command. But at what cost?" She gestured to her scarred body, to the tremor in her limbs that would never completely go away. 40,000 dead, an entire assault division reduced to scattered survivors. And for what? A world so thoroughly devastated that it will take centuries to be useful again. Populated by a species that will never stop fighting, never stop resisting, never stop looking for ways to strike back at their conquerors. The intelligence reports said that human resistance was finally broken, another soldier offered hopefully. "The intelligence reports were wrong," Zixathara replied flatly. "Human resistance was never broken. It was simply submerged, hidden, waiting for the right moment to resurface." She paused, considering her next words carefully. 3 months after the successful pacification of Kepler-440b, our garrison commander was found dead in his quarters, poisoned. No one saw the assassin. No one heard anything. The human who did it was never caught, never identified. They simply struck and vanished back into the population. One incident, Vexmora began. One incident became dozens. Zixathara cut him off. Supply convoys ambushed. Communication arrays sabotaged. Collaboration headquarters destroyed by mysterious explosions. Our soldiers couldn't walk the streets without wondering if the next human they saw was going to smile and offer them food or pull out a hidden weapon and try to kill them. She finished her drink and set the container down with a solid thunk. Within a year, we had to triple our garrison force just to maintain basic order. Within 2 years, the cost of occupying Kepler-440b exceeded the economic value of the entire planet. Within 3 years, High Command was quietly discussing whether it might be better to simply leave. The word came out as a shocked whisper from somewhere in the group. "Leave," Zixathara confirmed. "Abandon a world we had spent 40,000 lives to conquer, because holding it was costing us more warriors than we lost taking it. And that, younglings, is the real lesson. About fighting humans, victory against them is possible, but it's never final, never complete, never worth the price you pay for it." She stood, her interview clearly coming to an end. "So when you face them in battle, and you will face them, because this war is far from over, remember what I've told you. Remember that. Humans don't surrender when they're losing. They don't negotiate when they're desperate. They don't break when they're beaten. They become more dangerous." The young soldiers sat in stunned silence as Zixathara collected her personal effects and prepared to leave. At the doorway, she paused and turned back one final time. "One more thing," she said quietly. "In all my years of military service, fighting dozens of species across hundreds of worlds, I've never encountered an enemy that genuinely frightened me. The Velter were fierce, the Jekti were technologically advanced, the Murden were tactically brilliant, but none of them made me wake up at night, wondering if today would be the day. They finally found a way to hurt us badly enough to matter. Humans are different. When I sleep, I dream of children with sharpened sticks and the sound of Colonel Martinez's voice saying, 'We'd rather die free than live as slaves.' I dream of planets where the cost of victory is so high that defeat might have been preferable." She stepped toward the door, then paused again. "And sometimes, just sometimes, I dream of what might happen if humanity ever decided to stop playing defense and start taking the war to us." With that, she was gone, leaving the young soldiers alone with their thoughts and their fears. In the silence that followed, several of them began to quietly reconsider their enthusiasm for the coming deployment. After all, some warnings were worth heeding. 3 days after Zixathara's warning, the Fourth Fleet received new orders that would change everything. Lieutenant Vexmora found himself standing in the same cantina, where he had heard the commander's tale, but this time the atmosphere was different. The casual confidence of his fellow soldiers had been replaced by a nervous energy that seemed to permeate the very air they breathed. "Emergency briefing in Bay 7, announced Sub-Commander Crichtel as he burst through the cantina doors. All personnel. Immediate deployment. We're not going to the Terran front." The words sent a ripple of confusion through the assembled soldiers. Vexmora felt his chest plates tighten with anxiety. If they weren't going to fight humans, then what could possibly require such urgent mobilization? "Where are we going?" called out one of the veterans. "Earth," Crichtel replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're going to Earth." The cantina erupted in chaos. Soldiers jumped to their feet, their bioluminescent patches flashing in patterns of alarm and disbelief. Earth, the human homeworld, the birthplace of the species that had cost them so dearly on every front. It was supposed to be impregnable, protected by layers of orbital defenses and the most fanatical warriors humanity had to offer. "That's impossible," Vexmora heard himself saying. "Earth is a fortress world. High Command would never authorize." "A direct assault on High Command didn't authorize it," Crichtel interrupted. "The Supreme Hierarch himself issued the order, direct from the home system, bypassing all normal military channels. Every available fleet is being recalled from the outer territories. This isn't just an assault, it's the final push. We're going to end this war once and for all." As the soldiers filed out of the cantina toward the briefing bay, Vexmora found himself thinking about Commander Zixathara's words. "The humans become more dangerous when they're losing. But what happened when you cornered them completely? What happened when you threatened not just their colonies, not just their territories, but their very birth world?" Bay 7 was packed with soldiers from across the fleet, their various species creating a tapestry of chittering voices and flashing communication displays. At the center of the gathering, a massive holographic display showed the Sol system in stark detail. Earth hung in the center like a blue-green jewel, surrounded by the red dots that indicated defensive installations. Fleet Admiral Murthex stepped forward, his ancient carapace bearing the scars of a dozen campaigns. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Warriors of the Fourth Fleet," he began, "today we embark on the most important mission in the history of our species. For too long, we have allowed the human infestation to spread throughout the galaxy. For too long, we have accepted the unacceptable casualties that come with fighting this primitive species. Today, we end it." The display zoomed in on Earth, showing the orbital platforms, the moon-based installations, the asteroid belt mining operations that had been converted into weapon platforms. It was a defensive network that had taken humans centuries to build, and it looked absolutely impenetrable. Intelligence indicates that the humans have recalled nearly their entire military force to defend their homeworld. Murthex continued. "Their colonies are virtually undefended. Their supply lines are stretched to the breaking point. They have committed everything to this final stand." Vexmora felt a chill run down his spine. Everything. The humans had committed everything to defending Earth, which meant they were either supremely confident in their ability to win, or they had decided that losing Earth meant losing everything. "Anyway, our strategy is simple," the Admiral continued. "We will overwhelm their defenses through sheer numbers, the combined might of every hegemony fleet, supported by our most advanced weapons and our most experienced warriors. The humans cannot possibly stand against such force." The briefing continued for another hour, covering tactical deployments, supply chains, and communication protocols. But Vexmora found himself only half listening. Instead, he kept thinking about a human child with a sharpened stick, and a colonel who preferred death to surrender. When the briefing ended, he sought out Commander Zixathara's quarters. He found her sitting in meditation pose, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and controlled. She didn't open her eyes when he entered. "You heard about Earth," she said quietly. "Yes, Commander. I wanted to ask whether I think we can win." She opened her eyes and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Of course we can win, Lieutenant. We have superior numbers, superior technology, and superior tactical coordination. By every rational measure, victory is assured." "But," Vexmora prompted. "But humans aren't rational," she replied, "and neither is what we're about to do to them." She stood and walked to the small viewport in her quarters, gazing out at the stars rushing past as the fleet traveled through hyperspace. "Do you know what Earth means to humans, Lieutenant? It's not just their home world. It's not just the place where their species evolved. It's something deeper. Something that doesn't translate well into our language. I don't understand. Earth is there. Their soul, I suppose. Their collective identity. Every human, no matter where they were born, no matter how many generations their family has lived on other worlds, considers Earth to be home. It's where their art comes from, where their stories are set, where their ancestors are buried. Zixathara turned back to face him when we attacked their colonies. We're threatening their territory. When we attack their supply lines, we're threatening their resources. When we attack Earth, we're threatening their very existence as a species. Surely that will make them more likely to surrender, Vexmora suggested hopefully. If the stakes are that high, they'll have to be reasonable. Will they? Zixathara's laugh was bitter. Have you learned nothing from what I told you? Humans don't become more reasonable when the stakes are higher. They become more desperate, more dangerous, more willing to do things that no civilized species would ever consider. She moved to her personal terminal and accessed a classified file, displaying it on the wall screen. Vexmora recognized the format. It was an intelligence report, but one heavily redacted and marked with the highest security classifications. This is what intelligence doesn't want the regular troops to know, she said. 3 days ago, human deep space monitoring stations detected our fleet movements. They know we're coming. They know this is their final stand. And they've begun implementing something called Protocol Omega. What's Protocol Omega? We don't know exactly. The intelligence is fragmentary, coded in human languages that our translators struggle with. But from what we can determine, it involves the systematic destruction of everything on Earth that could be of value to an occupying force. Vexmora felt his blood chill. Scorched Earth tactics. That's not unusual. Many species destroy strategic resources when facing defeat. Not strategic resources, Zixathara corrected. Everything. Their art galleries, their libraries, their museums, their historical sites. They're destroying their own culture rather than let it fall into our hands. The implications hit him like a physical blow. They're erasing themselves. Worse than that. According to these reports, they're not just destroying physical objects. They're broadcasting everything into space: their music, their literature, their historical records, their scientific knowledge. They're trying to ensure that, even if we destroy their civilization, some record of it will survive in the cosmic background radiation. Zixathara closed the file and turned back to the viewport. Do you understand what that means, Lieutenant? They're not just preparing to fight us. They're preparing to die as a species. And they're doing it in such a way that their death will be permanent, irreversible, and absolutely complete. But surely their leadership is coordinating it. She interrupted. This isn't the action of a few desperate individuals. This is a species-wide decision, implemented by their highest authorities and carried out by their entire population. They have collectively decided that extinction is preferable to conquest. Vexmora sank into a chair, his mind reeling. How do we fight against that? How do we defeat an enemy that's already defeated itself? We don't, Zixathara said simply. We can occupy their world. We can claim victory in our reports. We can plant our flag in the ruins of their cities. But we'll never truly defeat them, because they'll have already done something that we can never undo. She paused, her expression growing distant. There's something else. Something that intelligence definitely doesn't want the troops to know. What? The humans have been preparing for this moment for decades, maybe centuries. They've been building something, hidden in the depths of their planet, powered by their planetary core itself. Our deep penetration sensors can't determine exactly what it is, but the energy signatures are unprecedented. A weapon, perhaps, or perhaps something else entirely. The humans have always been innovative when it comes to warfare. They don't just fight with conventional weapons, they fight with ideas, with concepts, with things that shouldn't be possible but somehow are. Zixathara moved away from the viewport and began pacing, her movements sharp with anxiety. There's a theory among some of the intelligence analysts, unofficial, of course, and absolutely classified, that the humans aren't just preparing to die. They're preparing to take us with them. What do you mean? Think about it, Lieutenant. If you knew your species was about to be extinct, if you knew that nothing you did could prevent that extinction, what would your final act be? What would you want your legacy to be? What would Vexthara felt a cold certainty settling in his chest. Revenge, exactly. And humans are very, very good at revenge. They hold grudges across generations. They remember insults and injuries for centuries. They've built entire civilizations around the concept of justice, of making things right, of ensuring that wrongs are answered. She stopped pacing and looked directly at him. What do you think a species like that would do with the knowledge that they were about to die? What kind of final gift would they prepare for the ones who killed them? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the fears and doubts of the soldiers who traveled between them. Commander, Vexmora said finally, should we be doing this? Should we be attacking Earth? That decision is above our pay grade. Lieutenant, we're soldiers. We follow orders. We fight where we're told to fight and die where we're told to die. The wisdom or folly of our leaders is not our concern. But even as she said the words, Vexmora could see the doubt in her eyes, for the first time since he'd known her. Commander Zixathara looked uncertain, and that uncertainty was more frightening than any enemy weapon. However, she continued, I will give you one piece of advice. When we reach Earth, when the fighting begins, stay close to the evacuation routes. Stay close to the transport ships. And if you hear any human say the words for Earth or remember Terra or anything that sounds like a final goodbye, yes, run. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back, because that's when you'll know that whatever the humans have been preparing is about to happen. And I have a feeling that when it does, the distinction between victory and defeat will become meaningless, as if summoned by her words. The ship's intercom crackled to life. All personnel, report to battle stations. We are approaching the Sol system. Repeat, we are approaching the Sol system. This is not a drill. Vexmora stood, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. Through the viewport, he could see the first pale glimmer of Sol, the star that had given birth to humanity. Soon, they would be fighting in the shadow of that star, and somehow he doubted that any of them would be returning home. Commander, he said as he prepared to leave, what if we're wrong? What if the humans do surrender when they see our fleet? What if they choose survival over extinction? Zixathara's laugh was hollow, empty of any humor. Then we'll have learned nothing about humans at all, and that, Lieutenant, would be the most dangerous outcome of all. The Sol system was nothing like what Vexmora had expected. As the Fourth Fleet emerged from hyperspace, he had anticipated to see a fortress, massive defensive platforms, weapon arrays bristling with destructive potential, fleets of human warships arranged in perfect battle formations. Instead, what greeted them was something far more unsettling. Silence. Earth hung in the void like a blue marble, beautiful and serene, surrounded by what appeared to be completely empty space. The orbital platforms were there, but they weren't firing. The defensive installations were active, but they weren't moving. The human fleet was visible on long-range sensors, but they were holding position near the moon, making no aggressive moves whatsoever. Where are they? Muttered Sub-Commander Crichtel from his position at the tactical display. Our intelligence indicated massive defensive preparations. This looks like nothing. Fleet Admiral Murthex stood at the center of the command deck, his ancient features twisted into a frown of confusion. The holographic display showed the positions of over 3,000 hegemony vessels, the largest military force ever assembled, facing what appeared to be a token defense. I notice your ships are retreating, Murthex observed. Not retreating, Chen corrected. Evacuating. There are still a few million humans on deep space installations, on generation ships, on colonies too far from stars to be affected by the chain reaction. They'll survive. They'll remember. And someday, when they're ready, they'll make sure the galaxy knows exactly what the hegemony did to us. 16 minutes. Called out the sensor operator. Admiral, Chen said, I'm going to make this offer one more time. Leave. Now. Turn your fleet around and go home. Tell your superiors that Earth was too well defended, that the cost was too high, that victory was impossible. You can still save most of your fleet. And if we refuse, then in 16 minutes, you'll discover what happens when an entire species decides that taking their enemies with them is worth any price. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Vexmora found himself thinking about everything. He'd learned about humans, their refusal to surrender, their willingness to fight impossible odds, their talent for turning defeat into something that looked suspiciously like victory. 15 minutes, the sensor operator called out. "Admiral," Chen said gently, "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that this is a bluff, that no species would actually do this. But you've been fighting us for decades. In all that time, have we ever bluffed about anything?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Vexmora could see the truth in Murthex's eyes. Humans didn't bluff. They threatened, they warned, they promised, but they never bluffed. When a human said they would do something, they did. If 14 minutes, Fleet Admiral, came a voice from the communications station. "We're receiving messages from the other fleet commanders. They're requesting permission to withdraw." 13 minutes. Murthex closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging with the weight of impossible decision. When he opened them again, he looked older, more tired than Vexmora had ever seen him. "Admiral Chen," he said quietly, "if we leave, will you call off the detonation?" "I'm afraid that's not how this works," she replied. "The device is already past the point of no return. Sol will go supernova in 12 minutes regardless of what you do. The only question is whether you'll be here to see it. Then why offer to let us leave?" "Because," Chen said, and for the first time, her voice carried a note of genuine emotion, "in spite of everything you've done to us, in spite of all the worlds you've conquered and all the lives you've taken, we're still human, and humans believe in giving their enemies a chance to walk away. Even when walking away means we live to fight another day, Admiral, after today. I don't think your species will have much appetite for conquest. I think you'll spend the next few centuries looking up at the stars and wondering if the next species you encounter might be as crazy as we are." 11 minutes. "Fleet Admiral," the communications officer said urgently, "the 3rd and 7th fleets are beginning their withdrawal. They're not waiting for orders." Murthex turned to his tactical officer. "What's the minimum safe distance for a supernova?" "Sir, there is no minimum safe distance. The radiation pulse will be lethal for 50 light years. The gravitational effects will be detectable for hundreds of light years. And the visual signature will be visible from the other side of the galaxy." 10 minutes. "Admiral," Chen said, "I'm going to close this channel now. My people are saying their goodbyes to Earth, and I want to be with them for our final moments. But I want you to know this isn't about hatred. This isn't about revenge. This is about freedom. This is about the right of a species to choose its own fate, even if that fate is extinction." 9 minutes. "Admiral Chen," Murthex said quickly, "will you tell me something? Why? Why choose this over life? Why choose death over submission?" Chen's smile was sad but genuine. "Because, Admiral, some things are worth dying for, and freedom is one of them." 8 minutes. The channel closed, leaving the command deck in stunned silence. Through the viewport, Vexmora could see hegemony. Ships beginning to turn, their engines flaring as they prepared for emergency hyperspace jumps. In the distance, Sol continued to burn with its ancient light, giving no sign of the catastrophe that was about to unfold. 7 minutes. "Fleet Admiral," the tactical officer said quietly. "Orders, sir." Murthex stood motionless for a moment, staring at the image of Earth on the main display. Then, slowly, he turned to face his crew. "All ships," he said, his voice carrying across the fleet communications network. "Immediate withdrawal. Emergency hyperspace jump. Full retreat." 6 minutes. As the hegemony fleet began its panicked exodus from the Sol system, Vexmora found himself thinking about a conversation in a cantina, about a commander who had tried to warn them about the true nature of humanity. She had been right about everything. Humans didn't surrender. They didn't negotiate. They didn't break when they were beaten. They became more dangerous. 5 minutes. And now, as he watched the most beautiful planet he had ever seen preparing to die in nuclear fire, Vexmora finally understood what Commander Zixathara had been trying to tell them. Victory against humans wasn't impossible, but it came at a price that no rational species would ever be willing to pay. For minutes, the last of the hegemony fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving the Sol system to its fate. In the distance, Earth continued to turn on its axis, serene and beautiful, while deep in its core, The device that would murder a star counted down its final moments. 3 minutes, and in the silence of space, with no one left to hear it, Sol began to sing its death song. 50 years later, in a cantina on the edge of hegemony space, an aged Vexmora sat across from a young intelligence officer named Kexran. The officer's patches glowed with the eager intensity of someone who had never seen real combat. Someone who still believed that war was about tactics and strategy rather than the deeper truths that could only be learned through blood and loss. "Tell me about the humans," Kexran said, his voice carrying the same confidence that Vexmora himself had once possessed. "The official records are incomplete. Most of the files from the Sol incident are classified beyond my clearance level." Vexmora, now a commander himself, bearing the scars of a dozen conflicts that had followed humanity's final gambit, studied. The young officer with eyes that had seen too much. Outside the cantina's viewport, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, but none of them were Sol. Sol was gone, along with everything it had once illuminated. "What do you know about the silence?" Vexmora asked. The silence, Kexran's patches, flickered with confusion. "I've never heard that term." "Of course you haven't. The High Command doesn't like to talk about it. But for the past 50 years, ever since Sol went supernova, something has been happening across the galaxy. Species that we approach for conquest negotiations have been reluctant to engage." Vexmora stood and walked to the viewport, his movements slower now, weighted with age and memory. "When we contact a new species, when we make our traditional demands for submission, they ask questions. They want to know about our military history, our previous conquests, our methods of occupation. And when we tell them about the various species we've absorbed into the hegemony, they always ask the same question." "What question?" "They ask about the humans." The words hung in the air between them. Kexran's patches had gone completely dark, a sign of deep thought or deeper fear. "But there are no humans left," the young officer said quietly. "They're extinct. The Sol supernova sterilized every world they ever touched. Even the deep space survivors couldn't have lasted more than a few generations without support infrastructure." "Are they extinct?" Vexmora asked. "Or are they just waiting?" He returned to his seat and activated a personal data pad, displaying a series of reports and intelligence summaries. 3 years ago, a hegemony patrol encountered a derelict ship. In the Vega system, the hull was composed of materials we'd never seen before, and the power source was completely unknown. But the ship's computers contained something interesting, a complete archive of human culture, history, and technology, a memorial, perhaps, or perhaps something more. The ship had been traveling for decades, maybe longer, following a course that would take it through the territories of every major civilization in the galaxy. When our forces boarded it, they found something else, a message recorded in hundreds of languages, including several that we hadn't encountered before. Vexmora activated the recording, and the cantina filled with the sound of a human voice, young, female, speaking in the measured tones of someone delivering a formal address. "To the civilizations of the galaxy," the voice said, "we are the children of Earth, the inheritors of Sol's light. Our parents chose death over slavery, extinction over conquest. They lit their own star to send a message across the void that some things are worth dying for, and freedom is one of them." The recording paused, and Vexmora could see the impact of the words on Kexran's face. The young officer's patches were flashing in patterns of barely controlled panic. "The message continues," Vexmora said. "But that's not the important part. The important part is what we found in the ship's navigation logs. It hadn't been traveling alone. It was part of a fleet, hundreds of ships, maybe thousands, all carrying the same message, all following courses that would take them to every corner of the galaxy. A propaganda campaign, more than that, a promise." The message goes on to explain that while Earth died, the human spirit survived. That somewhere out there, beyond the reach of any existing civilization, human colonies are growing, human culture is being preserved. Human children are being taught about the species that chose to destroy a star rather than submit. Vexmora closed the data pad and looked directly at Kexran. "And then it makes a very simple statement. We will return. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. And when we do, we'll remember what was done to our homeworld. We'll remember every species that supported the hegemony, every world that benefited from our destruction, every civilization that stood by and watched while Earth burned. But that's impossible, Kexrin protested. Even if some humans survived, even if they've managed to establish colonies somewhere, they couldn't possibly pose a threat to the hegemony. We're the most powerful military force in galactic history. Are we? Vexmora asked. Tell me, officer, how many conquest campaigns have we initiated since the Sol incident? Kexrin was quiet for a moment, clearly accessing his memory files. I don't know the exact number, but none, Vexmora interrupted. 0. In 50 years. The hegemony has not successfully conquered a single new world. Not because we lack the military capability, but because every species we approach asks the same question: what happened to the humans? And when we tell them, they decide that maybe submission isn't worth the risk. But surely some species would still choose to surrender rather than fight, would they? Let me tell you about the Kalari Republic. 5 years ago, we approached them with our standard conquest terms. They were a peaceful species, technologically advanced but militarily weak. By all calculations, they should have surrendered immediately. Vexmora paused, remembering the briefing that had changed everything. Instead, they asked for time to consider our offer. 48 hours later, they sent us a message. They had discovered the human archive ships, had studied human history, had learned about Sol, and they made us a counteroffer. What kind of counteroffer? They offered to share their technology with us, to engage in peaceful trade, to cooperate on scientific research in exchange. They wanted us to promise never to approach them for conquest again. They said that if we refused, they would implement their own version of Protocol Omega, their own version. They had spent those 48 hours reverse engineering the human stellar ignition technology. They were prepared to turn their own star into a weapon, just as the humans had done. They said that if we couldn't coexist peacefully, they would prefer to die free rather than live as slaves. Kexrin's patches had gone completely dark again. What did High Command decide? They accepted the counteroffer. For the first time in hegemony history, we backed down from a conquest because the cost was too high, and word spread. Within a year, 3 more species had approached us with similar offers. Within 5 years, it was a dozen. Today, nearly every civilization in the galaxy has access to stellar ignition technology. The humans, they didn't just kill themselves, Kexrin said slowly. They killed the entire concept of conquest. More than that, Vexmora replied. They created a galaxy where every species has the ultimate weapon, the ability to take their enemies with them. The balance of power has shifted so dramatically that traditional warfare is no longer viable. If you attack a species that has stellar ignition capability, you're not just risking military defeat, you're risking the destruction of entire star systems. He stood and walked to the viewport again, gazing out at the stars that now seemed somehow more fragile, more precious. But there's something else, something that keeps me awake at night. What? The human message ships didn't just carry archives and propaganda. They carried something else: genetic samples, cryogenic pods, artificial wombs. Everything needed to restart human civilization from scratch. Kexrin's silence was deafening. According to our xenobiologists, it would take approximately 200 years for a small population of humans to rebuild to pre-Sol levels of technology and civilization. It's been 50 years since the supernova, which means that somewhere out there, perhaps in a star system so remote that we've never discovered it, human children are growing up with stories about Earth, about Sol, about the species that murdered their homeworld. And in 150 years, they'll be ready to come home. They'll have the technology, the resources, and the motivation to reclaim what was taken from them. And when they do, they'll find a galaxy that has learned to fear them, a civilization that has been transformed by their sacrifice. Vexmora returned to his seat, his expression grave. Do you want to know the real secret? Officer, the thing that intelligence doesn't want anyone to know. What? We're not the dominant species anymore. We haven't been since Sol went supernova. Every decision we make, every policy we implement, Every diplomatic contact we initiate is influenced by the memory of what the humans did. We've become a species that lives in the shadow of our own victims. But they're dead, are they? Or are they just elsewhere, growing, learning, preparing for the day when they can return to settle accounts with the species that destroyed their birth world? Vexmora activated his data pad again, this time displaying a star chart. 3 months ago, long-range sensors detected something interesting in the Proxima Centauri system. Energy signatures that match human technology, but more advanced than anything they possessed before Sol. Radio transmissions in human languages, but with linguistic evolution that suggests decades of isolated development. You think they're already returning. I think they never left. I think some of them survived, and they've been watching us, learning from us, preparing for the day when they can reclaim their place in the galaxy. And I think that day is coming sooner than anyone expects. The cantina fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, but now they seemed somehow different, not just distant suns, but potential witnesses to humanity's return. Officer, Vexmora said quietly, let me give you the same advice that Commander Zixathara gave me all those years ago. When you encounter humans in battle, and you will encounter them, because they're coming back, remember that they don't fight the way we do. They don't surrender when they're losing. They don't negotiate when they're desperate. And they don't break when they're beaten. They become more dangerous. Exactly. And now they have something they didn't have before, the knowledge that the galaxy fears them. They know that their sacrifice changed everything, that their death gave birth to a new kind of warfare, where every species has the power to destroy stars. They know that we've spent 50 years living in terror of their memory, and that makes them more dangerous than ever. Vexmora nodded. The humans who return won't be the same species that died at Sol. They'll be harder, more ruthless, more willing to use the galaxy's fear against us. They'll be the children of martyrs, raised on stories of Earth's destruction, trained from birth to reclaim what was taken from them. What do? We wait. We prepare. And we hope that when they finally reveal themselves, they remember that some of us tried to warn against attacking Earth in the first place. We hope that they distinguish between the species that destroyed their home world and the individuals who opposed that decision. And if they don't, Vexmora's expression was grim, then we'll learn what it means to face an enemy that has spent generations preparing for revenge. We'll discover what happens when a species that turned their own star into a weapon decides that it's time to collect on old debts. He finished his drink and stood to leave. One final piece of advice, officer. When the humans return, and they will return, don't try to fight them. Don't try to negotiate with them. Don't try to reason with them. Just remember that they died for freedom once, and they'll die for it again. The only question is whether they'll be willing to let us die for it too. As Vexmora walked toward the exit, Kexrin called out one last question. Commander, do you think they'll forgive us, eventually? Vexmora paused at the doorway, his silhouette framed against the star-filled void beyond. Officer, I've studied human history for 50 years. I've read their literature, analyzed their psychology, tried to understand the species that would rather destroy a star than submit to conquest. And in all that time, I've learned one thing about humans that terrifies me more than any weapon they might possess. What's that? They never forget. Ever. They remember insults across generations. They nurse grudges across centuries. They build entire civilizations around the concept of justice and revenge. The humans who return won't be the ones who died at Sol. They'll be their children, raised on stories of Earth's destruction, taught to hate the species that murdered their world. So no forgiveness, no mercy, no quarter. When they return, they'll come not as conquerors, but as the righteous, dead, risen to claim vengeance for the greatest crime in galactic history, and will deserve everything they do to us. With that, he was gone, leaving Kexrin alone with the weight of humanity's approaching return. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, but now they seemed less like distant suns and more like watching eyes, patient, implacable, and utterly unforgiving. In the silence that followed, the young officer finally understood what his predecessors had learned too late. Some victories are more dangerous than defeat, and some enemies are more terrifying in death than they ever were in life. The humans were coming home, and the galaxy would never be the same.